The gallows ropes swayed in the morning wind above Lordsburg's main square. But Grant Brennan hadn't come to New Mexico territory to watch another hanging. He stood outside the telegraph office with a folded newspaper advertisement in his scarred hands, reading the words one more time before he went inside to send his response, though every person who passed him on the dusty street either stared or looked quickly away. The fire that had taken half his face 3 years ago in a barn collapse outside Abilene had also taken everything he thought his life would be. His fiancée had returned his ring without even visiting him while he recovered. His family had looked at him with pity until he couldn't stand it anymore. So he drifted west, working ranches where the foreman cared more about capable hands than a handsome face, saving every dollar until he could buy his own small spread 10 miles outside of Lordsburg. The land was good. The cabin was sturdy. The cattle were starting to multiply. But the silence at night was deafening, and Grant knew that a man couldn't build a real future alone. He'd seen the advertisements before, women back east seeking husbands in the territories, but he'd never had the courage to respond. What woman would choose a scarred cowboy when she could have any number of whole men? Then he'd seen her notice in the Santa Fe newspaper. It was different from the others. Where most women listed their accomplishments in needlework and cooking, Delilah Norton had written simply, "Seeking honest work and honest partnership in the territories. I am strong, capable, and not afraid of hard living. Age 22, no family remaining, no prospects in Boston. Will consider any serious offer." Something about those words had struck him. She wasn't looking for romance or easy comfort. She was looking for the same thing he was, a chance to build something real. Grant pushed open the door to the telegraph office, where old Samuel Patterson sat behind the counter sorting through papers. Samuel had been friendly enough when Grant first came to town, but that was before he'd seen beneath the wide-brimmed hat. "Need to send a response to a bride advertisement," Grant said, keeping his voice steady. He laid the newspaper on the counter and pointed to Delilah's notice. "Need to send it to this address in Boston." Samuel's eyes flicked up to Grant's face, lingering on the twisted scars that ran from his left temple down to his jaw, the puckered skin that had never quite healed right. His expression shifted into something between pity and discomfort. "Son, you sure about this? These women, they come out here expecting certain things." "I'll pay for the telegram," Grant said evenly. "Just need you to send it." The older man sighed and pulled out a form. "What do you want to say?" Grant had practiced the words 100 times. "Miss Norton, I own a cattle ranch outside Lordsburg, New Mexico territory. Small but growing. I can offer marriage, partnership, and honest work as you requested. I should tell you that I was badly burned in a fire and carry scars. If you can accept this, I will treat you with respect and work to build a good life together. Reply if interested. Grant Brennan." Samuel wrote it all down, though his hand hesitated several times. When he finished, he looked up at Grant with something almost like concern. "That's pretty direct about the scars. You might want to know," Grant interrupted. "She deserves to know what she'd be getting." The telegram cost more than Grant wanted to spend, but he counted out the coins and left before Samuel could offer any more unwanted advice. Outside, the morning sun was already beating down on Lordsburg's dusty streets. A group of ranch hands from the big Morrison spread stood outside the saloon, and one of them caught sight of Grant. "Hey, boys, look. It's that burned-up cowboy from the Miller place," the man called out, loud enough for half the street to hear. Grant recognized him as Jack Sullivan, a loudmouth who'd been run out of Texas for cheating at cards. "Heard he's looking for a wife now. Can you imagine? What woman would say yes to that?" The others laughed, and Grant felt the familiar heat of shame and anger rise in his chest. But he kept walking, kept his eyes forward. He'd learned long ago that responding only made it worse. The laughter followed him down the street until he reached where his horse was tied. The ride back to his ranch took over an hour, and Grant used the time to wonder if he'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe Samuel was right. Maybe he should have lied, sent a telegram that made him sound whole and normal, and then hoped Delilah would be too committed to back out when she arrived. But he'd seen enough dishonesty in his life, had been on the receiving end of enough false kindness. If she was going to say no, better it happened now than after she'd traveled 2,000 miles. 3 weeks passed before he heard anything. Grant threw himself into work, repairing fences and moving cattle to better grazing. He rode into town only once for supplies, and when he collected his mail from the general store, the clerk made a show of checking twice as if Grant might not be able to receive letters. But there was one. A telegram from Boston, forwarded from the telegraph office. Grant's hands shook as he opened it right there in the store. Mr. Brennan, your honesty is appreciated and refreshing. I accept your offer. Will arrive in Lordsburg on the stage from Santa Fe on April 23rd. I hope you are prepared for hard work, as I have been told I can be difficult. Delilah Norton. Grant read it 3 times. She'd said yes. Despite everything, despite the scars and the small ranch and the hard life he'd promised, she'd said yes. He wasn't aware he'd made any sound until he noticed the clerk staring at him. "Good news?" the man asked, though his tone suggested he couldn't imagine what good news Grant Brennan might receive. "I'm getting married," Grant said, and the words felt strange in his mouth. 3 weeks from now." The clerk's eyebrows shot up. "You're what? Who'd agree to that?" Grant folded the telegram carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, right over his heart. "A woman brave enough to leave everything she knows for a chance at something better. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get my ranch ready for a wife." He bought enough supplies to last a month, spending money he'd been saving for a new plow, but none of that mattered now. He needed to make the cabin suitable for a woman, needed to show Delilah that even if he couldn't offer her beauty or social standing, he could at least offer her a clean, comfortable home. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Grant scrubbed every surface in the cabin, repaired the places where wind had gotten through the walls, and built a proper washstand in the bedroom. He brought in wildflowers and put them in a jar on the table, then worried that was too presumptuous and took them back out. He practiced what he would say when he met her, how he would stand so the worst of the scars weren't the first thing she saw. On April 23rd, Grant rode into Lordsburg wearing his cleanest shirt and newest hat. He arrived 2 hours before the stage was due, too nervous to risk being late. He tied his horse outside the stage office and tried to ignore the looks from people passing by. Word had spread about his mail-order bride, and the general sentiment seemed to be amusement mixed with pity for the poor woman who didn't know what she was getting into. Grant overheard 2 women talking outside the dry goods store as he passed. "Can you imagine," one said, "coming all this way to marry a man sight unseen and then having to face that?" "Apparently he told her about it," the other replied. "Minnie at the telegraph office saw the message." "I suppose you have to give him credit for honesty, at least. Honesty won't keep her from running right back to the stage when she sees him in person." Grant kept walking, but their words settled into his chest like stones. What if they were right? What if reading about scars in a telegram was completely different from seeing them in person? He'd given her an out before she traveled, but maybe he needed to give her one when she arrived too. He couldn't trap a woman into a marriage she didn't want. The stage from Santa Fe finally appeared in a cloud of dust at just past 2 in the afternoon. Grant stood off to the side as the driver pulled the horses to a stop and jumped down to open the door. A prosperous-looking merchant emerged first, then an older couple who were immediately met by family members calling out greetings. Then a woman stepped down, and Grant knew immediately it was Delilah. She was tall, nearly as tall as Grant himself, with dark brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her dress was simple and worn, mended in several places, and she carried a single carpet bag that looked like it held everything she owned. But it was her face that stopped him, the way she looked around at Lordsburg with an expression of determination rather than fear or disappointment. Her eyes scanned the small crowd and landed on Grant. For a moment, neither of them moved. Grant knew she could see the scars clearly now in the afternoon light, the way the left side of his face was pulled tight and shiny, how his left eye sat a bit lower than it should. He'd taken off his hat when the stage arrived, and there was nothing to hide behind anymore. Delilah walked straight toward him, her stride purposeful. She stopped a few feet away and looked him directly in the face, her gaze neither pitying nor disgusted, just assessing. "Mr. Brennan?" she asked. "Yes, madam. Miss Norton, I presume." "I am." She set down her carpet bag. "Thank you for being honest in your telegram. It made the decision much easier." Grant wasn't sure what to say to that. Around them, people were definitely watching, waiting to see what would happen. He could hear whispered conversations starting up. "I should tell you," Grant said, forcing the words out before he lost his nerve. "If you've changed your mind now that you see me in person, I'll pay for your room at the boarding house tonight and your stage fare back to Santa Fe tomorrow. No obligations, no judgment." Delilah tilted her head slightly. "Why would I change my mind? You told me about the scars. I can read. Did you think I didn't understand what that meant? Understanding something in a telegram and seeing it in person are different things." "I suppose they are." She picked up her carpet bag again. "I also understand that I left Boston with $23 to my name. No family, no prospects, and a landlady who was threatening to put me out on the street. I understand that you're offering me partnership and honest work. Unless you lied about owning a ranch or being capable of treating me with respect, I can't see why I'd turn around and leave." Grant felt something loosen in his chest. "I didn't lie about any of it." "Well then." Delilah looked around at the watching crowd and raised her voice slightly. "I believe we have a wedding to arrange, unless there's something else we need to discuss first." A woman in a blue bonnet standing nearby actually gasped. Grant heard someone else say, "She's really going through with it," just like that. Grant picked up Delilah's carpet bag, which was surprisingly light. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from here. I thought we could get married today if you're willing. The Reverend in town does weddings most afternoons, or we can wait if you'd rather have time to settle in first." "Today is fine," Delilah said. "I'd rather have things settled." They walked together down Lordsburg's main street toward the small church at the end of town. Grant was acutely aware of everyone watching, heard the increase in whispered conversations as they passed. Outside the saloon, he saw Jack Sullivan and his friends had emerged to watch. "Look at that," Sullivan called out, laughing. "She actually showed up. Hey, lady, you know you don't have to go through with this, right? There's plenty of better options around here." Delilah stopped walking and turned to face Sullivan directly. "Better options? Like a man who spends his afternoons drinking and mocking strangers. I'll take my chances with Mr. Brennan, thank you." Sullivan's face reddened as his friends hooted with laughter at his expense. Grant felt an unexpected surge of affection for this woman he barely knew, who traveled across the country to marry him, and was already defending him against the town drunks. Reverend Thomas was in the church preparing Sunday's sermon when they entered. He was an older man with kind eyes who'd always treated Grant fairly, never staring too long at the scars or offering unwanted pity. "Mr. Brennan," he said, standing up from his desk, "how can I help you?" "This is Miss Delilah Norton from Boston," Grant said. "We'd like to get married if you have time today." Reverend Thomas looked between them, and Grant could see him taking in the situation. The mail-order bride, the scarred cowboy, the quickness of it all. But he just nodded slowly. "Marriage is a serious commitment," he said gently. "Miss Norton, you've only just arrived. Perhaps you'd like a few days to be certain." "I'm certain now," Delilah said. "I didn't travel 2,000 miles on a whim, Reverend. Mr. Brennan and I have an agreement, and I'd like to formalize it." "And you, Grant, you're sure about this?" Grant looked at Delilah, at her determined jaw and steady gaze. "Yes, sir, I'm sure." "Very well. We'll need 2 witnesses. Let me see if I can find someone." Reverend Thomas went outside, and they could hear him calling to people passing by. A few minutes later, he returned with Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house, and Tom Miller, the rancher Grant worked for sometimes. Both looked curious but not unkind. The ceremony was simple. Grant and Delilah stood before the altar while Reverend Thomas read from his prayer book. When he asked if Grant would take Delilah as his lawfully wedded wife, Grant's voice was steady as he said, "I will." When Delilah said the same words back, Grant felt something shift inside him, like a door opening that he'd thought was permanently closed. "You have a ring?" Reverend Thomas asked. Grant did. He'd bought it the day after receiving Delilah's telegram, a simple gold band from the general store. He'd spent nearly all his remaining savings on it, but it seemed important to do this properly. He slipped it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. "By the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas said. "You may kiss your bride." Grant hesitated. They hadn't discussed this part. He looked at Delilah, trying to gauge her reaction, and she simply nodded once. He leaned in carefully and kissed her, just a brief press of lips that tasted like dust from the road and possibility. When they pulled apart, Mrs. Henderson was wiping her eyes. "Well," she said, "I hope you'll both be very happy." They signed the marriage certificate with Mrs. Henderson and Tom Miller adding their signatures as witnesses. Reverend Thomas recorded it in his big ledger and gave them a copy for their records. Just like that, Grant Brennan and Delilah Norton became Grant and Delilah Brennan. Outside the church, the sun was starting to drop toward the horizon. Grant offered Delilah his arm, and she took it as they walked back toward where his horse was waiting. "I didn't arrange for a wagon," Grant admitted. "I have a horse. Can you ride?" "I've ridden before," Delilah said, "though not often." Grant untied his horse, a reliable mare named Daisy. "She's gentle. I'll ride behind you if you want to take the saddle, or you can ride behind me. Behind you is fine." Grant swung up into the saddle and then offered Delilah his hand to help her up. She settled behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist out of necessity. It was the closest they'd been to each other, and Grant was hyper-aware of her presence, the way she felt solid and real behind him. They rode out of Lordsburg as the sky turned orange and pink. Grant could feel people watching, could imagine the conversations that would happen once they were gone. Let them talk. He had a wife now, a real wife who'd looked at his scars and said yes anyway. "Tell me about the ranch," Delilah said after they'd been riding for a while. "It's small," Grant admitted. "About 300 acres, maybe 40 head of cattle. The cabin has 2 rooms, a main space and a bedroom. There's a well that runs clean and good grazing land. I've been working it alone for about a year, so it's not as developed as it could be, but the land is paid for free and clear." "That's more than I expected," Delilah said. "In your telegram, you made it sound smaller. I didn't want you to come out here expecting something grand and be disappointed." "Grant," She said his name for the first time, and it sounded right in her voice. I left a boarding house where 6 of us shared 2 rooms and the landlady charged extra for hot water. I worked 14 hours a day in a shirt factory for wages that barely covered my rent and 1 meal. My parents died of influenza 2 years ago, and I have no siblings. You couldn't disappoint me if you tried. Grant absorbed this, trying to imagine that kind of life. I'm sorry about your parents. Thank you. What about your family? They're in Kansas. Parents and 2 sisters, all married now. We don't talk much anymore. Because of the scars. Grant appreciated that she just said it directly. Because of how they looked at me after. Like I was broken. Like they were waiting for me to shatter into pieces at any moment. I got tired of being someone's tragedy. I understand that, Delilah said quietly. After my parents died, everyone in our neighborhood looked at me with pity. Poor orphan Delilah, struggling to survive. I hated it more than I hated being poor. They rode in silence for a while, both lost in thought. The New Mexico landscape stretched around them, all red rock and scrub brush and endless sky. The air was cooling now that the sun was setting, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. That sound always startled me at first, Grant said. Coming from Kansas, I wasn't used to coyotes. What else should I know? Delilah asked. About living out here. It's hard work and long days. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, a rancher named Dutch who's friendly enough but keeps to himself. Lordsburg is the closest town, but we won't go often. Maybe once a month for supplies and church. Water is precious, so we use it carefully. In summer it gets hotter than you can imagine. Winter can be cold, but nothing like Boston. Rattlesnakes are common, so you check your boots every morning. That's practical information, thank you. What about the work? You mentioned partnership in your telegram. I meant it. I need help with the cattle, the garden, maintaining the property. I can teach you about ranching if you don't know it already. In return, you'll have a roof, food, and half of anything the ranch produces. We're partners in this. Good, Delilah said. I'm not afraid of work. The ranch appeared as the last light was fading, the cabin a dark shape against the darkening sky. Grant felt a sudden nervousness. What if she hated it? What if the reality of her decision hit her now, when it was too late to easily turn back? He dismounted and helped Delilah down, then led Daisy to the small barn to unsaddle her. Delilah followed, looking around at everything. Grant tried to see it through her eyes. The rough wooden structures, the empty corral, the cabin that was sturdy but plain. The barn is new, he said, just to fill the silence. Built it myself last fall. The chicken coop is behind it, and there's space for a garden plot over there. I haven't had time to work it properly, but the soil is good. It's more than I expected, Delilah said again. Show me the cabin. Grant lit a lantern from the barn and led the way. The cabin door stuck a bit, as it always did, and he had to put his shoulder into it. Inside, he quickly lit the other lamps, illuminating the space he'd worked so hard to prepare. The main room held a table with 2 chairs, a cook stove, a few shelves with supplies, and a rocking chair he'd bought from a widow in town. A door on the back wall led to the bedroom, which contained a bed, a chest for clothes, and the washstand he'd built. It wasn't much, but it was clean and solid. Delilah set down her carpet bag and walked slowly around the space, running her hand over the table, examining the stove, looking out the window into the darkness. The bed, she said finally. There's only one. Grant felt heat rise to his face, the scars pulling tight. I can sleep in the barn, he said quickly. I should have mentioned that before. This marriage, it doesn't have to be that kind of marriage unless you want it to be. I'm not expecting anything from you except partnership. Delilah turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. You'd sleep in the barn. Yes, for as long as you need. Forever if that's what you prefer. She was quiet for a long moment. That's very decent of you, but I don't think it's necessary. We're married. We're both adults, and it gets cold at night, doesn't it? Grant's mouth went dry. Are you saying? I'm saying we can share the bed, Delilah interrupted. I'm not expecting romance or passion, Grant, but I'm also not a china doll who needs to be protected from her own husband. We're partners, like you said. Partners trust each other. Trust takes time, Grant said carefully. We've known each other for about 4 hours. Then we'll build it. Delilah picked up her carpet bag. I'd like to wash up if there's water, then I'm going to sleep. It's been a very long day. Grant showed her the water barrel, the basin, the soap. He busied himself outside, checking on the animals one more time, giving her privacy. When he came back inside, she was emerging from the bedroom wearing a simple nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. Your turn, she said. I'll just look around a bit more. In the bedroom, Grant washed quickly and changed into his night clothes. He could hear Delilah moving around in the main room, the soft sounds of her exploring her new home. When he came back out, she was standing at the window, looking out at the stars. You can see everything out here, she said. In Boston, there are so many lights that you forget the stars exist. Grant came to stand beside her. That's one thing I love about this place. No matter how hard the day is, the stars are always there. They stood together in the lamplight, two strangers who'd made a promise to build something together. Finally, Delilah turned toward the bedroom. Come on, she said. Tomorrow will come early, I imagine. The bed was smaller than Grant remembered. They lay side by side in the darkness, careful not to touch, both staring up at the ceiling. Grant could hear Delilah breathing, steady and even. Grant, she said after a while. Yes. Thank you for being honest about the scars, for giving me a choice. For not expecting things just because we're married. It means more than you know. Thank you for saying yes, Grant replied. I know you had other options. I really didn't, Delilah said, but there was a smile in her voice. But even if I had, I think I would have chosen this anyway. Good night, Grant. Good night, Delilah. Grant lay awake long after Delilah's breathing shifted into sleep. His wife. The word felt strange and wonderful and terrifying. He'd been alone for so long, had convinced himself that this kind of normal life wasn't possible for him anymore. But here she was, sleeping beside him, solid and real and choosing to stay. He must have dozed eventually because he woke to early light filtering through the window and the smell of coffee. Grant sat up in confusion. Delilah's side of the bed was empty and neatly made. He dressed quickly and went into the main room. Delilah was already dressed in a simple work dress, her hair braided back. She'd clearly figured out the stove and had coffee brewing along with something that looked like cornmeal mush. Good morning, she said. I hope you don't mind. I'm used to waking early and I was hungry. The supplies you have are basic but adequate. Grant crossed to the stove, still trying to wake up. You didn't have to cook. I should have been up first. Why? Are you the only one who's allowed to use the stove? Delilah handed him a cup of coffee. I told you I'm not afraid of work. That includes cooking. The coffee was good, strong, and hot. Grant accepted a bowl of the mush, which Delilah had sweetened with a bit of honey she'd found in the supplies. What needs doing today? Delilah asked as they ate. Cattle need checking. There's a fence section that needs repair on the eastern boundary. The garden plot should be prepared if we're going to get anything planted this season. General maintenance. Grant paused. But you just arrived. You should rest. I rested on the stage for 3 days. Show me around the ranch properly. Teach me what I need to know, and then we can divide up the work. They spent the morning together, Grant showing Delilah every part of the ranch. She asked good questions, took in information quickly, and didn't complain when the work was difficult. They moved a small group of cattle to better grazing, checked and refilled water troughs, and examined the fence line Grant had mentioned. "This section here has been giving me trouble," Grant explained. "The posts aren't set deep enough, and the cattle keep pushing through to the other side. It's not our land over there, so I need to keep them contained." Delilah studied the fence. "If we brace it with additional posts at an angle, would that help?" "It might. That's good thinking." They worked together to cut and set new posts, Delilah holding them steady while Grant drove them into the hard ground. It was hot, dusty work, and by midday they were both sweating. "Break time," Grant said, sitting down in the shade of a scraggly tree. He'd brought water and some bread, which they shared. Delilah took off her bonnet and wiped her face. "I can see why you needed help. This is too much for one person." "It's been a challenge," Grant admitted, "but I wanted my own place, something I built myself. After the fire, after everything, I needed to prove I could still do something that mattered." "You proved it," Delilah said. "This ranch is impressive for one person working alone." "What did you do in Boston?" Grant asked. "You mentioned a factory." "Shirt factory, yes. I sewed buttonholes for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Before that, I worked in a laundry. Before that, I tried being a maid, but I wasn't very good at being deferential." Delilah smiled slightly. "I have a tendency to speak my mind, which doesn't go over well in service." "I noticed that yesterday with Sullivan," Grant said. "That was something, the way you shut him down. Men like that are all bluster. They back down the moment someone stands up to them." Delilah took a drink of water. "The factory was terrible, but at least it was honest work. What I couldn't stand was the other women, the way they all dreamed of being rescued by some wealthy man, as if that was the only way to escape. I wanted to rescue myself." "Is that what this is? Rescuing yourself?" "Partially. But it's also building something which is more interesting than just escaping." Delilah looked out over the ranch. "I meant what I said about partnership. I'm not here to be taken care of. I'm here to work beside you." They finished the fence repair by late afternoon and headed back to the cabin. Delilah immediately set about making dinner while Grant tended to the animals. It felt domestic and strange and right all at once. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Grant taught Delilah everything he knew about ranching, and she absorbed it all with a focus that impressed him. She learned to identify the different cattle, to spot when an animal was sick or injured, to read the weather and know when to move the herd to shelter. She was also strong, stronger than Grant had expected. She could lift fence posts, haul water buckets, and wrestle a stubborn calf without complaint. In the evenings, they sat together at the table, talking about the day's work and planning the next day. Sometimes they played cards or read from the few books Grant owned. The conversation came easier as they learned each other's stories. Grant told Delilah about growing up in Kansas, about his father's wheat farm and his mother's garden. He told her about the barn fire that had changed everything, how he'd run inside to save the horses and hadn't realized the loft was about to collapse until burning wood was falling around him. He'd gotten the horses out, but a beam had caught him across the face, and by the time help arrived, the damage was done. Delilah told him about Boston, about her father who'd been a clerk and her mother who'd taken in sewing. She told him about the influenza epidemic, how quickly both parents had sickened and died within days of each other. She told him about the months after, struggling to pay rent and buy food, slowly selling everything her family had owned just to survive. "That's when I realized I had two choices," she said one evening. "I could stay in Boston and slowly grind myself down to nothing, or I could take a risk on something different. When I saw your advertisement, it felt like a sign." "I'm glad you took the risk," Grant said, and he meant it. Having Delilah here had changed everything. The ranch work went faster with 2 people. The cabin felt like a home instead of just a place to sleep. And slowly, carefully, they were becoming something more than just partners in a business arrangement. A month after Delilah arrived, Grant woke in the middle of the night to find her pressed against his side, her head on his shoulder. They'd gradually shifted closer in sleep over the weeks, but this was different. He lay very still, not wanting to wake her but acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. In the morning, Delilah moved away before she woke fully, and neither of them mentioned it. But that night, Grant carefully put his arm around her, giving her every chance to move away. She didn't. Instead, she shifted closer, her hand coming to rest on his chest. "Is this all right?" Grant asked quietly. "Yes," Delilah said. "Is it all right with you?" "Yes." Something had shifted between them, subtle but definite. During the day, they found excuses to stand closer, to touch briefly when passing tools or walking together. Grant caught himself watching Delilah as she worked, admiring the efficient way she moved, the determined set of her jaw when she encountered a difficult task. One evening in early June, they were sitting outside watching the sunset after a particularly long day of moving cattle. Delilah was leaning against Grant's shoulder, comfortable in a way that felt earned rather than assumed. "Can I ask you something?" Delilah said. "Of course." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been burned? If you'd married your fiancé and stayed in Kansas?" Grant considered this. "I used to. Right after it happened, that's all I could think about, the life I'd lost. But now, honestly, I don't think I was happy even then. I was doing what was expected, following the path laid out for me. I didn't have the courage to choose something different." "So the fire gave you courage?" "No. The fire took everything and left me with nothing to lose. That's different from courage." Delilah turned to look at him. "What about now? Do you have something to lose?" Grant met her eyes, seeing the real question behind the words. "Yes, I do." "Good," Delilah said softly. "So do I." She kissed him then, a real kiss, not the brief, formal press of lips from their wedding day. Grant responded carefully at first, still half expecting her to pull away, but she didn't. She kissed him like she did everything else, with focus and determination and an honesty that made his heart race. When they pulled apart, Grant was breathing hard. "Delilah, I know we said this marriage didn't have to be that kind of marriage," Delilah interrupted. "But I've been thinking that maybe I'd like it to be, if you want that too." "I want that," Grant said. "I've wanted that for weeks now. I just didn't know if you—" "I do," Delilah said firmly. She stood up and held out her hand. "Come to bed." That night was different from all the nights before. They learned each other slowly, carefully, with a tenderness that came from weeks of building trust. Grant kept waiting for Delilah to show some sign of revulsion at his scars, but she touched them as easily as she touched the rest of him, with curiosity and acceptance. "They're just scars," she said when she noticed him watching her nervously. "They're part of you, but they're not all of you. Can we stop worrying about them?" "I'll try," Grant said. "Good. Now stop thinking so much and kiss me again." The summer passed in a rhythm of work and growing intimacy. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. The garden produced well, providing vegetables to supplement the beef. The cattle multiplied, with several successful births. Grant and Delilah rode into Lordsburg together once a month, and while there were still stares and whispers, they bothered Grant less with Delilah at his side. One Sunday after church, Mrs. Henderson approached them. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "When you first got married, I thought she might not stay. I'm glad I was wrong. You two look happy together." "We are," Delilah said simply, taking Grant's hand. Not everyone in town warmed to them. Jack Sullivan and his friends still made occasional comments, though never when Delilah could hear. The few times Grant went into town alone, he faced the usual stares and uncomfortable conversations, but it mattered less now. He had a home to return to, a wife who loved him, a life that felt full and real. In late September, Delilah told Grant she was pregnant. They were sitting at the table after dinner, and she just said it plainly, watching his face for his reaction. Grant felt a wave of emotion so strong he couldn't speak for a moment. Joy and fear and wonder all mixed together. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. "I'm sure. I'm about 2 months along, I think. The baby should come in early spring." Delilah's hand went to her stomach. "How do you feel about that?" "Happy," Grant said. "Scared. I don't know anything about being a father." "I don't know anything about being a mother," Delilah pointed out. "We'll figure it out together like everything else." Grant crossed to her chair and knelt beside it, putting his hand over hers on her stomach. "A baby, our baby." "Yes." Delilah covered his hand with her other one. "I know this makes things more complicated. The ranch work will be harder when I can't do as much. We'll manage." "Delilah, this is wonderful news. I never thought I'd get to have this. A family." She leaned down and kissed him. "You're going to be a good father. You're patient and kind and hard-working. Those are the things that matter." Over the following months, they prepared for the baby. Grant built a cradle from wood he'd been saving, carving simple designs into the headboard. Delilah sewed baby clothes from fabric she ordered through the general store. They discussed names endlessly, never quite agreeing on anything but enjoying the debates. Delilah continued working as long as she could, though Grant increasingly insisted she take it easier. By January, she'd finally agreed to focus on the lighter tasks, while Grant handled the heavy ranch work alone. "I hate this," she said one evening, watching Grant come in exhausted from a long day. "I should be helping." "You're growing a baby," Grant pointed out. "That's more important than fixing fences. Both things are important, and I feel useless." Grant sat beside her and took her hand. "You're not useless. You're giving us a future. That matters more than anything." The baby came in March, during a rare spring rainstorm. Grant rode through the rain to fetch the midwife from Lordsburg, a capable woman named Sarah who delivered half the babies in the territory. By the time they returned, Delilah's labor was progressing fast. Grant waited in the main room, pacing and useless, while Sarah and Delilah worked in the bedroom. He could hear Delilah's occasional sounds of pain, and it was torture not being able to help. He'd faced angry cattle, venomous snakes, and violent weather without flinching, but this helplessness was worse than any physical danger. Finally, after what felt like hours, he heard a baby's cry. Grant was at the bedroom door instantly, pushing it open to see Sarah holding a small, red-faced, squalling infant. "It's a boy," Sarah announced. "A healthy, strong boy. Come meet your son." Grant crossed to the bed where Delilah lay, exhausted but smiling. Sarah placed the baby in her arms, and Grant sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at this tiny person they'd created. "He's perfect," Grant whispered. "He is," Delilah agreed. She looked up at Grant. "What should we call him?" They'd discussed this endlessly but never decided. Now, looking at his son, Grant knew. "James, after my grandfather. He was a good man, honest and kind. If the baby grows up to be anything like him, we'll have done well." "James Brennan," Delilah tested the name. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world." Sarah showed them how to care for the baby, how to wrap him snugly and help him feed. She stayed overnight to make sure both mother and child were doing well, then left the next morning with instructions and promises to check in within the week. The first few weeks with baby James were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry. Every cry sent Grant into a panic that something was wrong. But Delilah remained calm, treating this new challenge the same way she treated everything else, with practical determination. "Babies cry," she said when Grant came running at 3 in the morning, convinced something was terribly wrong. "He's fed, dry, and healthy. He just wants comfort. Here, hold him while I get some water." Grant took his son, still nervous about his large, scarred hands holding something so small and fragile. But James settled against his chest, his cries quieting to whimpers and then stopping altogether. "See," Delilah said, returning with water. "He knows his father's voice already." As spring turned to summer, they adjusted to life as a family of 3. James grew steadily, becoming more alert and responsive. Grant found himself talking to the baby constantly while they worked, narrating the ranch tasks as if James could understand. "We're checking the fence line today," he'd say, carrying James in a sling Delilah had fashioned. "See how the posts need to be set deep? That's so the cattle can't push through. When you're older, I'll teach you to do this properly." Delilah watched them together with obvious affection. "You're a natural at this," she said one evening as Grant rocked James to sleep. "I knew you would be." "I'm terrified every moment that I'll do something wrong," Grant admitted. "Welcome to parenthood. I think that's normal." They celebrated their first anniversary in late April, a quiet affair with just the 3 of them. Grant had traded some beef to a rancher for a bottle of wine, and they drank it after James was asleep, toasting to the year that had passed and the years to come. "When I responded to your telegram, I had no idea," Delilah said. "I thought I was agreeing to a business arrangement, a partnership to survive. I didn't expect to fall in love." Grant felt warmth spread through his chest. They'd shown love in their actions for months now, but they hadn't said the actual words yet. "I love you too. I think I started falling for you that first day when you faced down Sullivan without flinching." "I started falling for you when you offered to sleep in the barn," Delilah said. "When I realized you actually cared about what I wanted, not just what you could get from me." They kissed, soft and lingering, comfortable in the way that comes from truly knowing another person. The next few years passed in a steady progression of seasons and growth. The ranch continued to prosper. They expanded their herd, bought more land from a neighbor who was moving back east, and built an addition onto the cabin to give James his own small room. James grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who wanted to be involved in everything. Grant made him a child-sized hat and let him help with ranch tasks, which usually meant playing in the dirt while Grant worked. Delilah taught him letters and numbers, starting his education early. When James was 3, Delilah became pregnant again. This time, Grant was less terrified and more excited. He knew what to expect, knew they could handle it. Their daughter arrived in November, during the first cold snap of winter. They named her Clara, after Delilah's mother. She had Grant's dark hair and Delilah's determined expression, even as a newborn. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her constantly. Grant and Delilah supervised carefully, teaching him to be gentle, and James took his role as big brother very seriously. "I protect her," he declared. "She's little, so I watch out." "That's good," Grant said. "Being a big brother is an important job." The town of Lordsburg continued to grow and change. New families moved in, bringing fresh faces and fewer people who remembered the initial gossip about Grant and Delilah's marriage. Grant gradually became known not as that scarred cowboy, but as Grant Brennan, the rancher with the well-managed spread east of town. He and Delilah made friends slowly, other ranching families who appreciated hard work and didn't care about scars or unconventional beginnings. They attended church regularly, participated in town gatherings, and became part of the community in a way Grant had never expected. One Sunday after church, when James was 5 and Clara was 2, they ran into Reverend Thomas. "I've been meaning to tell you," the Reverend said. How glad I am that I married you two that day. I had my doubts, I'll admit. It seemed so rushed, so impulsive. But watching you together over the years, seeing the family you've built, it's clear I was wrong to doubt. We had doubts too, Delilah said, taking Grant's hand, but we worked through them. That's what marriage is, Reverend Thomas said, working through doubts together. You two are a good example for the whole community. That evening, after the children were asleep, Grant and Delilah sat outside watching the stars as they had on so many nights before. You ever think about how different our lives could have been? Grant asked. If you'd chosen one of the other advertisements, or if I'd never had the courage to send that telegram. Sometimes, Delilah admitted, but I can't imagine my life being better than this. I know it hasn't always been easy, Grant. I know people still stare sometimes, still make comments. But we built something real here, something worth having. We did, Grant agreed. I spent so long after the fire thinking my life was over that I'd never get to have the normal things. A wife, children, a home, and then you said yes. They laughed when you asked for a bride, Delilah reminded him. But I'm not laughing, I never was. No, you just looked me in the face and said you'd take your chances. Grant pulled her closer. Best chance I ever took writing that telegram. Best chance I ever took answering it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the New Mexico stars wheel overhead. From inside the cabin, they could hear the soft sounds of their children sleeping, the gentle breathing of the life they'd created together. Years continued to pass, each one adding depth to their story. When James was 8 and Clara was 5, they welcomed another child, a son they named Thomas after the Reverend who'd married them. 3 children meant more work, more chaos, more laughter filling the cabin. The ranch grew too, becoming one of the more successful operations in the area. Grant hired help during busy seasons. Young men who wanted to learn ranching and didn't mind working for a scarred boss who expected hard work, but treated employees fairly. Delilah became known for her skill with difficult births, both animal and human. She'd learned from helping Grant with calving and had a steady hand and calm demeanor that served her well. Women in the area started calling for her when their time came, and she'd go help, returning with stories and often a pie or preserves as payment. You're delivering half the babies in the county, Grant said one evening after she returned from helping a neighbor. Someone has to, Delilah replied. Sarah is getting older and there aren't enough midwives out here. Besides, I like helping. It reminds me how lucky we are. James grew into a serious, responsible boy who loved the ranch and spent every free moment following Grant around, learning everything he could. Clara was more independent, equally comfortable helping with cattle or sitting inside reading the books they ordered from catalogs. Thomas was still small, but he showed signs of having his mother's determined personality. When James turned 10, Grant sat him down for a serious conversation. The ranch will be yours someday, he said. You and your brother and sister, you'll inherit all of this. That means you need to learn not just how to do the work, but how to make good decisions, how to treat people fairly, how to be someone folks trust. Like you, James said simply. Grant felt emotion tighten his throat. I'm not perfect, son. I've made plenty of mistakes. But people trust you. They like you. Even with the scars, people know you're fair and honest. James looked at his father seriously. You taught me that what matters is how you act, not how you look. That's the most important thing I've learned. That night, Grant told Delilah about the conversation. He's growing up so fast. Sometimes I look at him and I can't believe we made that. We made all 3 of them. I know what you mean, Delilah said. She was sewing by lamplight, mending one of Thomas's shirts that he'd torn climbing a tree. Sometimes I still feel like that woman stepping off the stage, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. And then I realize we've built an entire life since then. Do you ever regret it? The choice you made? Delilah set down her sewing and looked at him directly. Grant Brennan, in the 15 years we've been married, have I ever given you reason to think I regret this? No, but no buts. I left Boston with $23 and no prospects. Now I have a husband I love, 3 beautiful children, a home I helped build and respect in this community. Why would I regret any of that? Because it's hard. Because you work constantly. Because you could have had an easier life if you'd made different choices. Easier doesn't mean better. Delilah stood and crossed to where Grant sat. You gave me partnership, honesty, and a chance to build something meaningful. Those are worth more than easy comfort. Please stop waiting for me to leave. I'm not. You are. Some part of you is still that man standing outside the telegraph office, convinced no woman would say yes. But I did say yes, Grant, and I keep saying yes every day. When are you going to believe it? Grant pulled her into his lap, holding her close. I believe it. I do. Sometimes I just can't quite believe how lucky I am. Good. Now stop being ridiculous and come to bed. Thomas will be up early wanting breakfast, and we need to check the south pasture tomorrow. Life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew and changed. James became a skilled rancher, capable of handling most tasks independently by the time he was 14. Clara discovered a talent for training horses and started taking in animals that other people considered too wild or stubborn. Thomas showed an interest in books and learning that suggested he might not want to be a rancher at all, and both Grant and Delilah supported whatever path he chose. Not everyone is meant for this life, Delilah said when Grant worried about Thomas's future. If he wants to go to school, study something else, we'll find a way to support that. We built this ranch for our children's future, whatever that looks like. When Grant was 45 and Delilah was 43, they attended the wedding of Tom Miller's granddaughter in Lordsburg. It was a big celebration, with people coming from all over the territory. As they stood watching the young couple take their vows, Grant remembered his own wedding in this same church over 20 years earlier. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, seeing the expression on his face. "Our wedding. How simple it was. How terrified I was that you'd change your mind." "I was terrified too," Delilah admitted. "Not of you, but of making such a huge decision so quickly. What if it was wrong? What if I'd made a terrible mistake? And now," she squeezed his hand, "now I know it was the best decision I ever made." At the reception afterward, Jack Sullivan approached them. He was older now, grayer, with the bloated look of too many years drinking. "Brennan," he said, his voice carrying that same mocking tone from decades before. "Still making it work, I see. Surprised that woman hasn't left you yet." Before Grant could respond, Sullivan's own wife appeared at his elbow. "Jack, leave them alone. Go get some food and sober up." She turned to Grant and Delilah apologetically. "I'm sorry, he's been drinking since noon. Please don't pay him any mind." "It's fine," Delilah said calmly. "We don't." They moved away, finding a quieter corner of the celebration. "He's still the same," Grant said. "And we're not," Delilah pointed out. "We have a good life, Grant, a really good life. What does his opinion matter? It doesn't, it really doesn't." And Grant realized he meant it. The days of letting Jack Sullivan's mockery hurt him were long past. Their children continued to grow into their own people. James married a rancher's daughter from the next county over, a practical woman named Hannah who fit seamlessly into the family. They moved into a cabin Grant and James built together on the far edge of the property, close enough to help with the ranch but far enough to have their own space. Clara, at 20, showed no interest in marriage yet, too focused on her horse training business to think about courting. She'd built a reputation across the territory for her ability to handle difficult animals, and people brought her horses from as far as 50 miles away. Thomas, at 17, announced he wanted to be a teacher. "I could teach here in Lordsburg," he said. "The school needs someone, and I like working with children. I know it's not ranching, but nothing," Grant interrupted. "If teaching is what you want, then that's what you should do. We're proud of you, son." "Your grandfather would be proud too," Delilah added. "All three of you, following your own paths. That's what we wanted for you." When Grant and Delilah celebrated their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party. Half the county seemed to show up at the ranch, bringing food and gifts and stories. Grant stood with Delilah's hand in his, looking around at the life they'd built. There was James with Hannah and their 2 young children playing in the yard. There was Clara, demonstrating horse training techniques to a group of admiring young men. There was Thomas, surrounded by the children he'd soon be teaching, already explaining something with animated gestures. There were the neighbors they'd worked beside for years, the friends they'd made, the community they'd become part of. There was their ranch, expanded and prosperous, the cabin now a full house with the additions they'd built over the years. "What are you thinking?" Delilah asked, echoing her question from so many years before. "I'm thinking about that day in Lordsburg when you stepped off the stage," Grant said. "I was so sure you'd take one look at me and get right back on. I couldn't imagine anyone choosing this life choosing me. I'm glad I did. I'd choose it again, knowing everything I know now. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts. They made us who we are." Delilah leaned against his shoulder. "You gave me a home, Grant. Not just a place to live, but a real home. I gave you the same thing. That's what partnership means." As the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple, Grant and Delilah stood together watching their family, their friends, their life. The scars that had once defined Grant's existence were just part of his face now, as familiar to everyone as his steady hands and quiet voice. They'd built something lasting, something real. From a desperate telegram and a brave yes, they'd created a legacy that would extend beyond both of them. The ranch would pass to their children and their children's children. The lessons they'd learned about partnership, honesty, and choosing to build rather than give up would echo through generations. "Come on," Delilah said, tugging Grant toward where someone had started playing a fiddle. "Dance with me." "I'm not a good dancer," Grant protested, but he was already following her. "You never were. Dance with me anyway." They joined the others in the yard, moving to music under the stars. Grant held Delilah close, this woman who'd said yes when everyone expected her to laugh and walk away. This woman who'd chosen partnership over pity, who'd built a life with him that exceeded anything he'd imagined possible. The years continued their steady march forward. Grant and Delilah grew older together, their hair graying, their movements slower but still capable. They passed more of the ranch work to James and Hannah, though they still checked cattle and mended fences, unwilling to fully step back from the life they'd built. Clara eventually married a horse breeder from Arizona who appreciated her skill and independence. They stayed in the area, building their own spread focused on breeding and training quality horses. Thomas became a beloved teacher in Lordsburg, known for his patience and creativity in the classroom. The grandchildren multiplied. James and Hannah had 5 children in all, a rowdy crew who ran through the ranch house bringing noise and joy. Clara and her husband had twins, a boy and a girl who seemed to have inherited their mother's way with animals. Thomas married one of the young widows in town, a woman with 3 children of her own who Thomas raised as his own alongside the 2 more they had together. 13 grandchildren, Grant said one evening, trying to keep track of all the names and ages. "How did that happen?" "One at a time," Delilah said, laughing. "Just like everything else in our life." They were sitting on the porch of the ranch house, watching several of the grandchildren play in the yard while their parents worked nearby. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm and peaceful, with the kind of contentment that comes from a life well lived. "Do you remember that first night?" Grant asked. "When you arrived and I offered to sleep in the barn?" "I remember thinking you were either incredibly decent or incredibly foolish," Delilah said. "Maybe both. I was terrified. Of you, of marriage, of everything. So was I. But we figured it out together." Delilah took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "That's our real legacy, Grant. Not the ranch or the children or any of it. It's showing them that you can choose partnership, that you can build something real from honest work and respect." "They laughed when I asked for a bride," Grant said, repeating the words he'd heard that day in Lordsburg so many years ago. "And I said yes," Delilah finished. "Best decision either of us ever made." As the sun set over the New Mexico landscape they'd made their home, Grant and Delilah Brennan sat together, hands clasped, watching their family. The scarred cowboy and the mail-order bride had become something more. Partners, lovers, parents, grandparents, pillars of their community. The doubters who'd laughed that day in Lordsburg were long silent. The ones who'd predicted failure had moved on or changed their minds. What remained was the undeniable evidence of two people who'd taken a chance on each other and built something that would last generations. "I love you," Grant said, words he never tired of saying even after 30 years of marriage. "I love you too," Delilah replied, "now and always." The stars came out above the ranch, the same stars that had witnessed their first nervous nights together, that had shone on every season of their life. Grant and Delilah sat together in the gathering darkness, comfortable in the silence, secure in the life they'd created, grateful for the day she'd said yes when everyone expected her to laugh and walk away. Their story wasn't dramatic or grand. It was the story of two people choosing each other every day, working together, building together, loving together. It was the story of how honest partnership can create something stronger than either person could have managed alone. It was the story of how second chances, when embraced with courage and commitment, can lead to lives richer than any first chance could have provided. And as they finally rose to go inside, where a fire waited in the hearth and a warm bed beckoned, Grant and Delilah knew that their story, though nearing its end, would continue in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they'd built, in the community they'd served, in every life they'd touched by simply choosing to say yes, and then doing the hard work of keeping that promise every single day. The scarred cowboy had found his bride. The mail-order woman had found her home. And together, they'd found something neither had quite believed possible when they started. A love built not on appearance or circumstance, but on respect, partnership, and the daily choice to build something beautiful together.